This video is sponsored by Skillshare, an online learning community for creative and curious people. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing really well today. So I am back today to work on some scrap fabric sewing projects, and it's been a really long time since I've done one of these videos. So as you might imagine, I've collected quite a few scrap fabrics over the past few months. So today I've put together 5 different projects that are all using some scraps from my fabric stash. And if you've been following my channel over the past few months, you will probably recognize all of these fabrics because they've all been in different projects that I've made recently. So I hope you guys will enjoy seeing all of the projects. I really love how they all came together, and I'm going to go ahead and jump in with the first project. Let's start by making this cute quilted key fob. So for this project, I have these scraps of this blue and white floral fabric, and I also have a little bit of cotton batting, and then this clip that I actually recycled from an old thrifted dress. So I've started by cutting my fabric into 2 strips that will fit through this little clip when they're sewed together on either side with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I've also cut a strip of batting in the same width, and then I'm going to layer one of my pieces of fabric over the batting, and then layer the other strip of fabric on top of that with the right sides of the fabric together. Then I'm going to sew this together on either side with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. To reduce the bulk, I'm going to trim away my seam allowances, being careful not to cut the stitching, and then I can turn this tube of fabric right side out. Now to give this key fob that cool quilted texture, I'm just going to run 3 rows of top stitching across the entire tube of fabric, and I'm making my rows of stitching about 1/4 inch apart. So now all we need to do is attach the fabric to the clip. So I'm going to start by pulling one end of the fabric through the clip and extending it out about 1.5 inches here. Then I'll put the other end of the fabric right up next to the edge of the clip and fold over the edge that's coming out through the clip over the top of the other edge of fabric. I folded it over twice to conceal the raw edge, and then I'm just going to pin this in place and top stitch it down. I'm being careful to use a lot of back stitching here so that this remains really secure, and that's all that there is to this project. Now, before I move on to the next project, let's take a minute to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. I have been loving having Skillshare classes on in the background while I've been working on my sewing projects over the past few months, and I'm so excited to be working with them again on today's video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creators, and the topics range from sewing to graphic design to photography, productivity, and so much more. I love to use Skillshare both to go deeper into topics I'm interested in and to explore brand new ideas. This time of year is always really busy for me as I try to balance music teaching with my YouTube channel, so I've been enjoying some of the productivity classes on Skillshare over the past month. One in particular that I've really enjoyed is Greg McKeown's Simple Productivity class. Greg McKeown is the author of Essentialism, which is a book that I really enjoyed, so I've been loving getting some of his productivity tips in a class format, and it's definitely given me some ideas to stay a little bit more organized going into the fall semester. I love that Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, meaning that there are no ads, so I can have the videos playing in the background while I'm working on a project but stay focused on whatever I'm learning. Skillshare members get unlimited access to thousands of amazing video classes along with hands-on projects and feedback from the community of millions, and most classes are under 60 minutes, meaning that there's definitely something to fit with every schedule. And Skillshare has an amazing special offer for you guys today that I hope you will take advantage of if you're interested in trying them out. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description box will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so that you can start exploring your creativity today. Thank you again so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and now back to the scrap fabric projects. Next, let's make this travel jewelry case. This project took a little bit of engineering, but the final result is definitely worth all the work. So for this project, I'm going to use these scraps of this green trellis print fabric that I had left over from a dress that I had made, and I'm going to start out by cutting out all of my pieces. And to save a little bit of time, here is a chart of all of the pieces that you will need for this bag. So for the main fabric, there are the top and bottom pieces, the 2 zipper panels, and the back piece. Then there are the same pieces for the lining fabric, but also 2 additional pieces, and those pieces are the earring tab and the interior drawstring pouch. So it's just circles and rectangles, and I'm going to go ahead and cut out all of those pieces according to the measurements that I listed. So here are all the exterior pieces. Now keep in mind that the zipper panels should match whatever length of zipper you have, so you'll want to either adjust those panels or adjust your zipper to fit. Next, I'm just going to cut out all of my lining pieces from this cream colored muslin that I had in my fabric stash. To add a little bit more structure to this bag, I'm using something called fusible buckram. This is used in hat making, and it's a really nice stiff material that can add some body to your fabric. So I'm going to use this on all of the exterior pieces along with the 2 earring tabs and then the top of the lining. And now I'm ready to get started sewing the bag. So I'm going to start by attaching these zipper panels to the zipper. I'm using this nice chunky metal zipper, and I would recommend something like that for a bag like this. I'm going to start by laying the top zipper panel from the front of the bag on top of the zipper with the right side facing down. Then I'm going to line up the lining in the same way on the other side of the zipper and pin this in place. Then also all the way across all of these layers, making sure to catch all of the layers and not get too close to the zipper so that the zipper is sandwiched between these 2 layers of fabric. And after I've sewn all the way across this, I will turn all of the layers to the right side and top stitch this so that everything looks really neat. Next, I'm going to repeat this process with the bottom half of the zipper panels. Next, I'm going to attach the back of the bag to the zipper piece. So to do this, I'm going to place the outer piece from the outside fabric down against the zipper panel with the right sides together. Now I'm going to separate out the main fabric from the lining here and just pin this to the main fabric. And as I sew this together, I will sew the 2 ends separately so that I can sew just through the main layer of fabric. But when I get to the zipper in the middle, I'll sew across all layers. This will allow the main fabric and lining to be separate at the top and bottom of the bag so that it's a little bit easier to attach the top and bottom pieces. I'm going to repeat the exact same thing with the lining piece, just pinning the lining layers together, and then I'm going to sew all of these seams. So it might be a little bit easier to see here. I am sewing through just the lining layer here and just about 1.5 inches down on that section. Then I'll do the same thing on the shorter section on the other side. And then once I've sewn all 4 of these sides, I'll be able to sew through all layers in the middle across the zipper very, very carefully. Using 1/4 inch seam allowances on all of these seams. And then whenever I get to sewing through all layers on the zipper, I'm going to be so careful because you don't want to break your needle on the zipper teeth. So I like to use the wheel on my sewing machine and just really carefully move it up and down to make sure I'm not about to run into anything underneath, and that usually works really well. Now I'm just going to repeat this process on the other side of the bag to join it into a circle, and you may find you have to kind of fold the bag in a funny way to get the right sides together on both sides. I ended up bringing this back over to the ironing board just to show you how I did the lining because it was a little bit difficult, so I just had to kind of turn it the opposite direction and find how to put the right sides together, and then I just did the exact same thing. Next, we're going to make the earring tabs that will sit in the top of the jewelry case. So to make these, I'll take the earring tab piece and fold both of the long ends in about 1/2 inch and press them down. Then I'm going to fold this in half lengthways and press it really flat. To conceal any raw edges, I'm just going to tuck the ends into the interior of this fold, and then I'll take this tab over to the sewing machine and top stitch all the way across it. So next I'm just going to poke some holes in this strip of fabric so that we can put the earrings through them. And I wasn't quite sure how this was going to work, but because I used the buckram in this, they actually stayed really well. I'm just using a big quilting needle and using that to poke a hole into the fabric. And then I just ran the needle through it a few times to really solidify it and made sure that the earrings would fit through. So now I can add these tabs to the top of the lining fabric. So I'm going to start by adhering the buckram to this piece of lining fabric, and then I'll just pin these where I like them onto the lining fabric and top stitch across either end. Now we can start assembling the bag. So I'm going to start by adding the top pieces to the top of the bag, and I'll start with the exterior piece. So to do this, I'm just going to open out the bag so that I can see the top layer really well and turn it inside out. Then I'll just pin the circle to the outside of the bag with the right sides together all the way around the circle, matching up the edges as best I can. And then I'll sew all the way around the circle with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So here's what the bag looks like with that piece added, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it to the other side so that I can get ready to add the lining piece. So to add the top of the lining, I've gone ahead and unzipped the bag here so that I can really see what I'm doing. And then I'm just going to mark the center so that I can make sure that those earring tabs stay nice and straight. Then I'll just place this against the lining with the right sides together and start to pin it in place. And you'll see as I'm pinning this, I start to kind of fold the bag so that it's a little bit easier to work with. I'm going to leave a gap in this along the back section so that it's easier to turn to the right side, and I'm going to sew around all of the rest of the circle, leaving this open. So now when I turn this to the right side, the top of the bag is starting to look finished, and I'm just going to sew up that gap that I left by hand. This jewelry case has an attached drawstring pouch in the bottom of it, so I'm going to go ahead and assemble that now by placing this rectangle with the right sides together and sewing along the short edge, leaving about 1 inch of space open at the top so that we can add a drawstring later. I'm going to go ahead and press this seam open. I'm actually going to hem these two edges in a second, but I forgot about that at this point in time. And then I'm just going to fold the top of the bag over twice to create a casing for a drawstring. Then I'll top stitch all the way around this edge, making sure that there's enough space to thread a drawstring through. And here you can see me folding over and hemming those edges of those seams that I forgot to finish earlier. You could just use a serger or a zigzag stitch here if you wanted to. So now I'm ready to do the final assembly for the bag and add the drawstring bag and the bottom to the bag. So I'm going to start by placing the drawstring section of the bag against the lining of the bag with the right sides together and pin all the way around the bottom. Then I'm going to add on the bottom of the lining and pin all the way around in the same way, just making sure to catch all of these layers. I'm going to sew around this circle with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but making sure again to leave a little gap to turn this towards the right side later on. So now I'm ready to add the base to the bag. So I'm just going to turn this so that I can really see the edge of the bottom of the bag and then match the circular base to the edge all the way around and pin this in place and sew all the way around the circle. This is why it's important to have that little gap in the lining so that we can turn everything to the right side after I'm done sewing this seam. I'm going to turn everything right side out here, and then I can go ahead and sew up the gap in the lining using a needle and thread. Then all that's left to do is add a drawstring. I had a little bit of drawstring cord, so I'm just going to thread that through the top of the drawstring bag with a safety pin and knot it at the ends to create the drawstring. And with that, this project was done, and I think this little jewelry case is so adorable and definitely something that I will enjoy having in my travel gear. I'm always looking for something that will work well for storing jewelry in my suitcase, and I think this is the perfect solution. Next, let's make this adorable lavender sachet. So for this, I'm going to use the scrap of linen fabric that I had left over from a recent project, and I think it's the perfect thing for a little lavender sachet. I love having these to stack up with my sweaters to keep them seeming really fresh. So I'm going to start by cutting out two little heart shapes from my fabric. I'm just going to draw a half heart with a pencil and cut out a shape that I'm happy with. Next, I'm going to cut out a few strips of fabric. I'm cutting out 3 here just because I want this to be long enough to go around the edge of the heart twice to create a ruffle. If you had a longer piece of fabric, you could just cut 1 long piece, but since I'm working with a scrap, I cut out 3. So the first step to making this is to assemble these ruffle pieces. So I'm just going to pin all 3 of these rectangles of fabric together at the ends with the right sides together to create 1 loop of fabric. Then I'll stitch these in place with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to press all of these seams open, and then I'll fold this ruffle piece in half with the wrong sides together to create one nice smooth piece of fabric that we can gather up into a ruffle. Then I'll take this over to the sewing machine and run 2 rows of gathering threads all the way around the edge. Next, I'm going to pull up these gathering threads and adjust them so that the ruffle is the right length to fit to the edge of the heart. And once the ruffle is about the right length, I'm going to pin it around one of the heart pieces all the way around the edge with the gathering stitches facing towards the outside of the heart. Next, I'm going to sew the ruffle to this heart shape all the way around the edge using a basting stitch. Now I can layer the other heart piece over the first heart piece and the ruffle with the right sides together and pin all the way around the edge, making sure that the ruffle stays towards the inside. Then I'll sew all the way around the edge of the heart, making sure to leave a little gap to turn it right side out. With that seam sewn, I can go ahead and turn the sachet right side out, and then I'm ready to fill it. Fill my sachet with a mix of dried lavender and also just some polyfill that I had on hand. I didn't quite have enough dried lavender to fill the entire thing, but you could definitely just use the lavender if you wanted to. So to make this a little bit less messy, I'm going to roll up a sheet of paper and use this kind of like a funnel to fill up the sachet with the lavender, and then I'll just add polyfill to make it look really nice. I'm happy with how the sachet looks. I'm just going to pin that gap closed and then sew this up with a needle and thread. And once I finish stitching that gap closed, that is all there is to this project. I love using lavender sachets in my dresser drawers or putting them in with my folded up sweaters. I think they just make everything feel really nice and fresh and lovely. So up next, let's recover an old padded headband. So I had this headband on hand that had a few little stains on it, and I still really liked the style, but I decided to recover it in this scrap fabric that I had left over from a dress that I made. So to recover this headband, I'm going to start by taking a couple of measurements. First, I'm just going to measure the interior of the headband to see what the length is, and then I'm also going to measure the width. Headband is a little bit over 13 inches long, and then the widest point of the headband is a little bit wider than 1 inch, and then the thinnest part is a little bit over 1/2 of an inch. So I'm going to use these measurements to help me cut a piece of fabric that will cover this appropriately. So I'm going to start by cutting a strip of fabric that is a little bit more than 13 inches long, just long enough to cover the headband and also have a seam allowance. To make sure that this piece can cover the entire headband, I'm going to cut the width to 2.5 inches, and then I'll adjust the ends here in just a second. So next I'm going to fold this piece in half, and then I'm going to trim away a little bit of the width of the fabric from each end and taper it towards the center so that this fits properly to the headband. Now, the thinnest part of my headband was a little bit over 1/2 an inch, so I'm going to cut this to about 1 inch so that I have enough room to sew here. So now I'm just going to fold this in half with the right sides together, and I'm going to pin all the way across this and then sew across each short end and then the long ends, making sure to leave one little gap in the center so that I can put this onto the headband. Then I'll just sew all the way around this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Trim away any excess fabric here, and then I can turn this towards the right side. So now I can go ahead and place the cover on the headband, and this took a little bit of work to get it in the right place, but the headband is pretty bendable, so I was just careful not to bend it so much that it would break, and made sure that the seam was facing towards the same edge on both sides of the headband. And once the cover was on the headband, all that was left to do was to pin the gap together and then sew that together using a needle and thread so that none of the stitching is visible. I was actually really surprised at how fast and easy it was to recover one of these headbands. It always seemed like it would be a really complicated process to me, and I really love the final results. Next, let's make this cute quilted laptop sleeve. So to make this, I'm using some scraps of this blue floral fabric along with the solid blue fabric for the lining. And first things first, I'm going to cut out a rectangle of fabric that is about 1 inch bigger than my laptop all the way around. Then I'm going to cut out one more rectangle of fabric that extends out on the top so that this can fold over, and I'm just going to curve those edges with my scissors. I'm going to cut these same 2 pieces from some lining fabric and then also from some cotton batting. So first I'm going to place my main fabric over the batting, and then I'm going to pin this together so that I can go run some rows of top stitching all the way across these pieces of fabric. This will act like quilting in a similar style to what we did on the key fob earlier. I'm using my ruler and some pins to mark where I want my rows of quilting to be, and then I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and sew all the way across all of these rows. I'm going to do the same thing on both of the pieces of the outside of the laptop sleeve. Next, I'm going to pin the lining pieces together with the right sides together, and I'm going to sew all the way around these 3 edges to attach the front to the back. I'm going to use a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to sew this seam. You just want to make sure that this is going to fit to your laptop. And then I'm also going to go ahead and cut a piece of Velcro here to close the laptop sleeve. I'm going to pin the fuzzy side of this Velcro to the right side of the lining here at the tab that will fold over later and sew it in place. I'm also going to go ahead and layer together the outside pieces of the laptop sleeve and sew them together in the same way. Once those seams are sewn, I'm going to go ahead and trim away any excess seam allowance to make sure that this isn't taking up too much room on the inside of the laptop sleeve. So now I'm going to place the lining inside the laptop sleeve so that the right sides of these pieces are together. Then I'll pin all the way around the outer edge so that I can sew this in place. I'm going to make sure to leave a gap here so that I can turn this to the right side in a few minutes. And with those layers sewn together, I'm going to go ahead and trim away any excess seam allowance, and then I can turn this towards the right side. Now I'm going to pin together the gap that we left before, and I'm going to go ahead and top stitch all the way around the outside of the laptop sleeve. I just think that gives it a nice finished edge. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and pin the other side of the Velcro to the front of the laptop sleeve and sew that in place. The top stitching was done and the Velcro was added, this laptop sleeve was done, and I think it's such a cute little piece and a great thing to keep my laptop from getting scratched when it's in my bag. So that is it for these scrap fabric projects. I really hope you guys enjoyed seeing all of them. I think my favorites from this video are probably the little travel jewelry case or the quilted key fob. I've really been enjoying using this one, and I think both of these are so cute. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching all of the projects. Thank you guys so much for watching today. If you are new to my channel and are not yet subscribed and would like to be, you can go ahead and do that now by clicking the red button down below, and I would really, really appreciate it. And if you'd like to keep up with me outside of YouTube, TikTok and Instagram are the two best places to do that, and both of those will be linked down below. Thank you guys so much for spending your time here on my channel today, and thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to check the link down below to get your 1-month free trial of Skillshare, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!